Hello!
Hello!
And welcome to Summit 22. We're back in person for the first time since 2019, and it's wonderful to have you all with us here today. That was George the Poet. He's an award-winning artist and podcaster. He's had recognition from MTV, NME, the BBC, the Brit Awards, and I'm Joe, the host.
And I'm Ella. Regenerative by design is the theme of the day. But what do we mean by this? For us, rather than trying to make our economy less harmful to the planet, it's about creating a world in which our economic activity positively benefits the environment.
So there are a few themes we want you to keep an eye out, and they map to the three main sessions of today. So first up, a circular economy that is regenerative requires all of us to shift our mindset. Secondly, this starts with design, by intention. And thirdly, the economics need to work. We need different financial models, new policies, all creatively driving demand for a new way of doing things. So session 1, mindset, session 2, design, and session 3, economics.
And at 4:30 p.m., importantly, the bar opens, and we're also delighted to be joined by Brit Award-winning singer-songwriter Jack Garrett, who will be performing live for us, before we go into a live special edition of the Circular Economy show. In our first session, Lucy Parker is talking thought leadership together with Janine Benyus, Ellen MacArthur, and Kate Raworth. But before that, to kick us off, our CEO, Andrew, has a few words to frame the day.
Wow, welcome. It's so great to see you all and to be here in this special place. Last week, I held a duckling in my hand. It was small and it was warm, and it looked at me with small duckling eyes. A living thing, a small miracle. As a child, I was lucky. I spent most of my time in nature. I lived and walked and camped in the bush, and it was great. It was extraordinary. Most people today don't get to experience nature often, or much at all. Most children today grow up in cities. They grow up surrounded by cars and buildings and the smells of exhausts. And rather than living in nature, we today, more often than not, spend time online or walking around supermarkets, down aisles of endless packaged goods and mass-produced food. We see products that are wrapped in plastics, and they're designed for disposability. We live in a manufactured world that's more virtual and removed from nature. So what's all this got to do with today? We're here today to talk about regenerative by design. And as you just heard, we want to explore the idea of designing an economy so that it actively contributes to nature and regenerates it rather than destroying it. We've dedicated much of this annual summit to the discussion of the idea and what's needed to bring regenerative thinking and design into the mainstream of the economy. We're not going to dwell on the scale of the problem or the urgency. What we are going to focus on is solutions, innovation that can scale. And we want to showcase leaders and innovators who are mobilizing action. And we hope that today inspires you and helps convince you that this is both a compelling idea and a massive economic opportunity. So to kick things off, let's do a small experiment. Ask yourselves, what have you done today that has had a regenerative impact on nature? I suspect that several of you will be thinking, well, I've done quite a few things to reduce my impact, but what have you done today that has a positive regenerative outcome on nature? Personally, I've done nothing. Most days for me, it's nothing. For most people, it's nothing. As we live in today's linear economic world, it's a tough thing to do. Now, importantly, ask yourself, what has your organisation or business done today that is having a positive regenerative impact on nature? What have you done with your products and services that you provide, how you design them, how you produce them, and how you work with your suppliers? With a few very notable exceptions, some of whom you will hear from in the room today, the answer is typically nothing. Not even a consideration. It's just not part of business values and cultures and the way in which we think. It's not in our mindset. And this is the opportunity, because every one of you in this room today can change your mind, and you can reorient to a different direction. The opportunity is to design nature-positive outcomes into the economy so that regeneration of nature becomes an outcome of economic activity. So you might be thinking, well, what does all this have to do with the circular economy? The answer is that regenerating nature is one of the core principles. In our first report, in 2012, we included this image. And what you can see from this is that we have technical materials on the right and biological materials on the left. And it's sometimes easier to think about it in simple terms, as shown in this diagram. For technical materials, which are mostly finite, we need to think about stocks and flows. In simple terms, we need to design products and systems that eliminate waste and pollution and keep materials in the economy for longer. Doing this maximizes the return on invested energy that's gone into making them and reduces the demand for virgin materials. It makes space for nature. And at the same time, it creates new forms of economic value from the materials and products that would otherwise be underutilized and wasted. For biological materials, the things that grow and decompose and grow again, we need to think in terms of regeneration. We need to rethink biological feedstocks and how they are grown and farmed so that by design, the economic activity inherently promotes biodiversity and the regeneration of soil and nature. Much can be achieved through better farming and land practices, but we also need to radically rethink and increase the demand for more biodiverse and regeneratively grown produce by redesigning food, by redesigning fashion, and by redesigning other products that use biological materials. Regenerative circular design for buildings and infrastructure can also have a huge impact. And the work of Janine Benyus, Michael Paulin, and our partner Arup provide some inspiring examples of how to do this. Regenerating by design is exciting because it has multiple positive impacts on carbon sequestration, on biodiversity, on water, and to the health and wellness of our communities. And because it can be scaled globally, and it can happen really quickly. So again, the principles of a circular economy are to eliminate, to circulate, and to regenerate, all by design. Clearly, the material economy is only part of a broader socio-economic and geopolitical system. Solutions developed need to take into account context and also deliver better diversity, inclusion, equity, and wealth distribution outcomes. Kate Raworth's work and the Doughnut economics framework brilliantly highlight this, and we'll hear more from her about this today. So while we are focused today mostly on regenerative activity, we are also very focused on the technical sphere and continuing to drive major programs and initiatives for technical materials in plastics packaging, fashion, food, and the built environment. And I want to take just a moment to talk about plastics, which is an important topic and very challenging to address. Over the past few years, real progress has been made. The 1,200 signatories of the global commitment and 26 countries participating in the plastic pacts that we have mobilised are on track to eliminate 9 million tonnes of new virgin plastics from the market by 2025. This is a lot. If we piled this into the Wembley Stadium, it would fill it 100 times. But clearly, much, much more needs to be done. Over recent years, we've extensively promoted elimination, upstream innovation, and reuse. And more recently, we have been focused on flexible packaging, such as crisp packets, pouches, and sachets, which are hugely problematic and highly polluting, much more so than rigid plastics, things like plastic bottles. Every year, tens of trillions of individual pieces of flexible packaging are placed on the market. Much of this in developing markets, which have no waste infrastructure to collect it. And this type of packaging is the fastest growing fraction, set to double in the next 15 years, which is astounding. Much can and needs to be done by the companies and brands who are placing these on market. But it is absolutely clear that no single company can solve this issue alone. So we remain very focused on plastics, and with our partners, the United Nations, World Wildlife Fund, we're pushing for the establishment of a legally binding global treaty by 2024. The treaty has passed the first major hurdle. 157 countries voted for it, and it is now officially in negotiation. To be very, very clear, this is crucial. It's a crucial moment in time opportunity, and humanity's very best shot at having a meaningful impact on this catastrophic problem. It's absolutely vital that everyone in this room and across our network pushes hard to get this treaty in place and ensures it has teeth. 3 years ago, I stood on this stage and said we had nearly 2,000 organisations in our network. Today, that number is closer to 4,000. It represents 2.2 trillion of annual revenue, 38 million employees, value chains that span the entire globe. The potential of this network, of you in the room, and your ability to have influence is vast. Today, I'm pleased to announce 3 companies. Nestlé, the Coca-Cola Company, and Gucci are stepping up as strategic partners of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and are committed to raising their ambitions. Our plan is to continue to grow this network in size and ambition, and to also grow our media reach, to tell the stories of the champions driving innovation for scale solutions, and to continue to inform policy globally. We're supported by a visionary group of philanthropic partners, including the People's Postcode Lottery, and the Marva and the Schmidt Family Foundations, and the Dewan, Sun, Oak, Gulbenkian, Lourdes, and Porticus Foundations, who I want to sincerely thank. And of course, the team at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are world-class, creative and driven. I'm honoured to work with them, and I want to sincerely thank every one of them for what they do. I hope you leave today informed and inspired, and that you are motivated to raise your ambitions and to put regenerative squarely on your agenda, and to become even more visible leaders and champions of the circular economy transition. Thank you.
Regenerative agriculture is farming practices that bringing back destroyed soil in a way that makes soil healthy and productive, restores biodiversity, and improves nutrition. That's the future. There are 2 innovative farms in Kenya practicing regenerative agriculture. We have Tamaru using agroforestry and Farmer Max using livestock to regenerate soils.
On the broiler pasture, we have a small dairy herd that we move about 10 days in front of the chickens. And they graze the grass down to about 6 inches. The patties are full of natural protein by the time the chickens graze over them, so it further substitutes their feed in terms of natural protein that they are able to forage and peck at on the ground. What they poop out is our resource for the soil. Their poop is high in nitrogen. They are fertilizing the soil. We are trying to rebuild ecosystem health, and it's effective. And then behind the chickens are the sheep that come in, who also maintain a sort of level of pasture where we want it for the broilers. In other poultry operations, the poop is a burden, whereas for us, it's a tool to regenerate soil.
Really, when we first went to Brazil and discovered the advantages of syntropic agroforestry over any other agroforestry, we realized a lot of the crops that they were using in Brazil are also in Africa. And so we knew we could do it here and just slightly change it ever so slightly just to fit into the local context. So if you can imagine, in a natural forest, you've got lots of different levels. You've got your canopy crops, you've got your emergent above that, you've got your sub-canopy, and then you've got your ground level stuff. In some circumstances, you've even got stuff growing under the ground. And that's what we're strongly mimicking in a system like this. In syntropic agroforestry, everything is planted at the same time, be it from seed or from seedling.
You start planting trees and other crops that begin to grow slowly and helping each other. Fast growers begin to diversify the system and produce food at the onset of the systems.
So you've got a continuously self-propagating family of plants that build the soil for you.
O Saladorama é um negócio social e ser um negócio social é pensar no desenvolvimento da comunidade em todas as esferas e também ganhar dinheiro com isso. Fazer com que essa evolução de transformação dentro das comunidades seja financiada pelo próprio negócio. Esse tema vem evoluindo e vem ganhando aditivos muito importantes, que é pensar no impacto. Isso eu consigo incluir todo mundo. Eu consigo incluir grandes empresas, grandes indústrias a pensarem no impacto também que elas causam, seja nos seus produtos ou em serviços que ela pode estar prestando futuramente e transformando a sociedade. Então eu acredito que essa evolução de negócio social, ela vai passar a ser negócios de impacto social. Vão ser empresas de impacto social. São empresas que se preocupam não só com a venda do seu produto, mas qual é o ciclo que esse dinheiro faz e qual é o impacto que a empresa em si causa na sociedade. Um dos maiores desafios é criar um modelo de negócio sustentável dentro de uma periferia com uma proposta tão desafiadora que é mudar uma cultura de alimentação. As comunidades, antigamente, elas são conhecidas por ter horta. No Rio de Janeiro, tem muitas comunidades que se chamam fazenda, que se chamam várzea, que era onde as pessoas plantavam. Em algum momento, isso deixou de pertencer à comunidade e se transformou num privilégio, principalmente por uma elitização da questão do alimento. Porque para você ser orgânico, você tem que ter um selo, você tem que ser isso, você tem que corresponder a milhares de coisas. E as pessoas da comunidade se sentem inibidas de meter a cara e produzir seus alimentos. O que o Saladorama veio fazer é de falar, planta, desenvolve o teu negócio, não usa veneno e vende. E dizer para ele que o que ele está fazendo é bom e é um bem não só para ele, mas para a comunidade dele, é o nosso principal ponto ali de incentivo. O funcionamento da economia local nas periferias traz primeiro um resultado gigante, que é a empregabilidade. Mas quando esse dinheiro ele faz o giro dentro da própria comunidade, os serviços dentro da comunidade melhoram, as pessoas têm mais qualidade de vida. Quando eu compro alguma coisa dentro da comunidade, quando eu compro dentro de um mercadinho na comunidade, eu dou a possibilidade desse mercado melhorar. Me dá mais opções de compra, me dá mais opções de produtos, criar novos serviços. Tá tudo dentro da comunidade, tudo faz sentido.
Good morning to all of you here, and good morning to you on the platform. As I woke up this morning, I thought, really, it would be very hard to imagine a more illustrious lineup and a more inspiring cluster of concepts to have on the stage to begin this morning's summit. And here we are together. When we met this morning, Ellen, you said we're together again. How completely lovely is that? So let me just very briefly introduce who we do have here on the platform. Of course, Ellen really needs no introduction. We are, after all, gathering here in the name of the foundation which you brought into being, and the amazing team that pulls together all this energy around the circular economy to help us help build it. Janine, here on my left. Many of you will know Janine, of course, for her work for Biomimicry, which has done so much to inspire the involvement of the natural world in the way we design, how we organize, and how we build. And Kate, at the far end of this lineup here, whose work you'll know through Doughnut economics, which has really crystallized another way of looking at economics, as you would say, fit for the world in the 21st century. So this is an amazing set of thoughts on the platform. And I will kick off, I think, by asking an impossible question, Janine. In a body of work like yours, which is truly awesome, could you, in a nutshell, tell us what it's all about? In other words, just in a thought, what is at the essence of the idea of biomimicry? And crucially, why is it here today on the platform with you, connected to circular economy?
Thanks, Lucy. Biomimicry is innovation inspired by nature. That's the simplest way to put it. Our insight that we try to bring to people to remind us that a sustainable world already exists. Yeah. Right? It's already been invented. It's right outside. And we go beyond metaphor, and we actually go and we ask the natural world for design, engineering, social innovation advice, and increasingly ecosystem and built world advice. Mm-hmm. We have a company, Biomimicry 3.8. For 25 years, we've been working with about 200 firms. We go in as biologists to the design table, and they give us a functional challenge. You know, a barge company, Ingham, might say, we haven't redesigned our rudder for 120 years, so we go right to the experts, which are tuna, dolphin, penguin, insects that go through air, birds, anything that flows through fluids. And we look for patterns. And we bring those patterns back, and we save people a lot of energy. Or we save, you know, we try to get people to move completely off toxins. So we've worked with Interface, major carpet company. Their biggest environmental sin was glue. We got them off glue completely. Brilliant. By looking at how geckos adhere. So that's the kind of work that we do. It's amazing,
because when I hear it, I really hear the practicality of what you're doing. You're bringing it into the real yes. world. So, Kate, same and impossible question. It's a huge concept, Doughnut economics. At its essence, what do you want us to take out of the idea, and where does it link for you with the circular economy?
It starts by saying that every single student, young person that any of us know, when they are being taught economics, which means the art of household management, it should never begin like this with the supply and demand of the market. That is insane. It should begin with the living world, so that we start by understanding the household of which we're a part. And we recognize that there are life-supporting systems on which we depend. And these are the outside of the donut. Don't overshoot the limits of our planetary home. But at the same time, if 10 billion people are to thrive together on this planet, there's an inner limit of every person. We've called them human rights for decades. Every person has a claim to the resources they need for health and education and housing and community and voice and income. So, thriving is not endless economic growth. That is so last century. Thriving is meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And when I do it with my hands, it looks like a heartbeat. And if we can take what we know from human health, which is about thriving in balance, and take that to the planet, how do we now create an economy that thrives rather than tries to grow endlessly, no matter how rich we already are? We're in one of the richest nations in the history of humanity in this country right now, and yet we still are told by politicians and economists that the solution to our problems lies in yet more growth. There's an insanity to this. We need to learn to thrive. We need to create policies and business models and businesses that serve this goal. And it's really easy for me to sit here and say it. It's really hard to do. And we shouldn't use these words lightly. We shouldn't talk lightly about regenerative design because it's so powerful and beautiful, and we haven't yet learned to do it. We are, as Janine would say, we are toddlers in the room. And let's celebrate that we're in the room, but we are so in the process of learning.
Right at the beginning of the whole thing.
Yes.
And Ellen, when you hear those extraordinary summaries of big ideas, circular economy, where do they fit? How do they align with the circular economy idea to you?
I think, as Andrew said just now, we have to shift our actual economy, the way our economy functions, to thrive, to generate that regeneration. We have to get to that point. This isn't a bolt-on or an add-on to what we do in our linear system. We need to redesign it. We need to know exactly what success looks like. We need to work out what that regeneration actually looks like for farming. When you look at the technical cycles, keeping those products cycling so that they stay within the system, so they take the pressure off nature and we don't need to keep mining more. We need to understand what this looks like, and then we need to get there. And we know we have to do this. You know, the impossible word we heard from the poet this morning, you know, is impossible impossible? No, it's not, because we don't need new technologies to do the majority of this. We know how to do it. We need to set our goals to get us there. So in essence, it's the mindset shift is going from trying to tweak our current failing linear economy to rethinking how a regenerative, restorative economy would look.
So one of the things I'm hearing there is the sort of completeness of the tilt. It's really not just saying, let's do a few things and we hope we've fixed the problem we've got with this one. You're in different ways all saying tilt the whole thing over, redesign from scratch. This is a kind of noisy marketplace of ideas that we all live in today, and people are talking big ideas all around us. Are we being asked, I kind of know we're not, but I'd love to understand more. Are we being asked to choose between you? Are we being asked to choose, should we be following biomimicry? Should we be thinking about donut economics? Is it the circular economy? Is that a contest? How would you describe actually whether they're different or whether they're all pulling in the same direction, you're all pulling in the same direction? Kate, can I throw that to you?
Sure. For me, they are absolutely pulling in the same direction. And I have to say, it means a lot to me to sit right here in this sisterhood with two women who I met Janine yesterday, I've just met Ellen just now, and it means a lot to me because their work has massively inspired mine. And I think we're speaking to the same vision, coming in through different portals. So the donut, you can say, is a goal for where we want to get to, meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. Janine's work teaches us, and this is how the planet works. Can we learn from the best designers who've been around for millennia? And circular economy, to me, is one of the most powerful methodologies for getting there. We need to go from a degenerative system that we know we've inherited to regenerative by design. And these circular loops that Andrew was showing are a beautiful design print for us to start to understand, regenerate nature, circulate technical materials, and that's how we re-educate ourselves. So I see them as profoundly connected, and I talk about them all together at the same time. Different people will find different ones powerful as an entry point, but I hope as they enter, they discover these and many other ideas that are interconnected.
And what would be your take on that, Janine?
Absolutely. These are portals people enter to find the same thing, which is a vision of a world that works for all. And the living world is at the center of many of our ideas, I think. But biomimicry for me is kind of like the how. How to do that.
Yes.
So if you're, if you're looking at a world, at a city that works for all, for instance, and that has circular material flows and energy flows, you can't go to any model better than an ecosystem for that.
Yes.
So what we've been working with for about over 10 years now, and some of the most exciting work that we do, is to say that any developer, developing whether it's a building and a site or a factory or a corporate headquarters, city block, city, that that developer should be able to go to a reference habitat next door, to the wildland next door, and perform in the same way. That is, the ecosystems next door are providing these gifts, these ecological gifts. They're storing water, they're cycling nutrients, they're sequestering carbon, they're supporting habitat. So we actually get quantities. I mean, this is where the how comes in. We actually get quantities, and we say per hectare, this development that you're on, you should be able to store this much water, this much carbon, support this much habitat, build this much soil, block this much noise, cool this much temperature. And that design is the design for an economy that works for all.
Yeah.
Because it also happens to be a lush and livable place for people, and it's inherently circular.
It's interesting.
By design.
You put, well, I was going to say by design. You'd
By
actually
design.
kept me at the post,
Yeah.
because it's so fundamental to the circular economy by design.
Yes.
And you're saying let's learn from the natural world's
Yeah.
design to make it circular.
Because it's different, it localizes it. It's
Yeah.
going to be a different set of economic opportunities and a different set of circular opportunities depending on where you are. The ecosystem of that place has already figured that out.
So, Ellen, we're here because we're trying to make it happen. And as you said, Kate, actually, it's not here yet. It's so easy to talk about it as if it existed, where in fact we're at the foothills of trying to make it exist. So what would you say, Ellen, about what we have to do now? Because those are huge concepts, and we can see how they line up against one another. You walk in through an economics door, you walk in through a biology door, you walk in through a corporate change door, all ecosystems swirling around each other. What do we have to do now, Ellen?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to know where you're going. And as I mentioned, you need to understand what success looks like. And in its simplest form with the circular economy, through eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials, and regenerate nature, that gives us a really broad but fairly succinct guideline. So you need to understand what that success is. We need to get to that place where the economy shifts from being linear and degenerative to one which is regenerative by design. That's clear. And in order to do that, we think we need three things. One is business-led innovation and design, because business is the majority of the economy. So that is absolutely vital. Second, collaboration across ecosystems. As Janine said, and, we live in an ecosystem, the business ecosystem, the natural ecosystem. The natural ecosystem's been tested for billions of years. It's actually quite good. So that collaboration across ecosystems is vital. And, when we talk about the value chain, we have to link that together, because that chain where things fall off the end can never work. It never will. And then the third is we have to have enabling policies. And this is Kate's point. You have the donut. You have the overshooting on the outside, and you have the people falling through the middle. Business can't capture all of that. If business is pulling in one direction through innovation and design, moving towards this circular model, that's very different as a scenario for enabling policy to come along, because actually it's a win-win situation. If business is trying to get here and policy is trying to get us here, that's a different dialogue. And so that enabling policy is vital. And not everyone will be the front runners. You guys in this room represent 38 million employees globally. That is enormous. As Andrew said, $2.2 trillion of economic value in this room through you and the network. It is absolutely outstanding. We must not undervalue the impact that we in this room can have when we shift from that linear to circular mindset and we're able to regenerate.
And built into what you're saying there is scale. I mean, when we spoke, you said, yes, let's do it, but the key is let's do it at scale. So how would you think we move towards scale?
Pilot and replicate. I always try to look for things that are going to be fractal. That, for instance, back to this idea of factory as forest, we've been working with Microsoft and Ford and interface with their facilities producing. Can humans produce ecosystem services? Yes, we can, through design. So that's one place. And so the question is, what does that really do for a watershed? Right? Well, success has to mean that once Interface or Microsoft or Ford does that, that they go and they knock on the doors of their neighboring businesses and ask them to also produce ecosystem services, support biological habitat, support pollinators. These are things that work best when it's pixelated healing, right? When there's a lot of it going on. So we often say, whatever part of the earth you touch, you can heal. And so then we ask, what lands do you touch? And corporates say, well, you know, I have headquarters and I have factories. Oh, I also have supply chain.
Yeah.
What if there were positive ecosystem services being produced from all your supply chains because of you? A watershed better off because you're there. And then what else do you have? Oh, 48 million customers. What if you were to teach your customers how to create positive ecosystem services in their backyards or their balconies? What about your employees? Right? So it is something that I think that Ray Anderson used to call it the influence. Once you pilot something, it's not enough to make it lush and livable for your employees. It's the arrows that go out to the community. And then how many people can you influence to create more beneficial arrows so that the water leaving your whole city is cleaner than when it came in, and the air is cleaner than when it came in. Then we're functioning like the forest next door. And then we're at home on this planet.
And that is the power, really, of the corporate universe, is to create that knock-on ripple effect, and the leaders are out there doing exactly that, aren't they?
I can see that. It's going to take a lot, but I can see it.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, I guess, what we're hoping for, is to turn that vision into a reality. Kate, I know you're also very much focused on the practical, and you have the labs and so on. How do we get there in practice from concept to action?
So I find it so powerful hearing Janine speak to the possibilities of what a business can do. And I just want to reflect on the long journey that we are all a part of the mindset that we were told business should hold. I think we've come from a place where business was asking, how much can we get away with? Then we got to, okay, how much do we have to do? But what Janine is saying is a completely different question. How much can we possibly give back? And I think if we're going to make that transition from that, how much do we have to do, to how much can we possibly give back, I think that the frontier of design is beyond the products. It's the design of business itself. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the space where the really important and exciting innovation is going to happen, and we're just beginning. So what is the purpose of a company? Why does it even exist? What is it in service to in the world? How is it networking with its suppliers, with its own employees? How is it building those relationships and being generous through those relationships? How is it governed? Who has voice in decision making? But crucially, how is it owned? Is it owned by its employees, by venture capital, by shareholders, by the founding entrepreneur, by a family? Because how it's owned profoundly shapes where finance is coming from, what that finance expects and demands, how much it extracts for itself, and how much it reinvests in that generosity of purpose. So I'm listening today and looking for all the time examples of companies that realize if we're going to be regenerative by design, we need to go beyond redesigning our products. We need to redesign ourselves. And then we can be part of this transformation. That is where I think the deep transformation has to happen and come from, and it's really exciting, especially seeing young companies that are being born into this. Talk to young entrepreneurs, startups, they know they'll talk to you about the design of their product, and they'll immediately talk to you about how they're designing their board, their governance, their finance, their ownership. They're locking in the value so that it can't get captured, it can't get turned into a nice-to-have branding. It's their purpose. That's where the future is.
So it's built in.
And it's built in, it's locked in, it's protected so that it stays in service to its intention to be regenerative.
Yeah. Thank you. And Ellen, can I give you the last word? This is part of the mindset shift conversation for this part of the day. Can you just tell us in a nutshell what you mean by there's a mindset shift? This is non-trivial, isn't it? This is the whole thing you want to tilt over.
I think it goes back to both those points about why would a city not have water coming out of it cleaner than it coming in? Why would we not do that? Why would we have a business that degrades the world? When you think about the mindset shift, everything has to change. We have to go from the point where we're trying to fix what we have and make it last a bit longer to that massive opportunity to redesign the economy so it can work forever. And that involves all of this conversation and involves a complete rethink. And we need to get to the point where companies compete on their regenerational ability. Companies are competing on how well they're performing in the world. And young people are going into education wanting to make the world a better place, not thinking, how can we eke this out a little bit longer? That is a total mindset shift. You know, as Andrew said, we don't want to talk about the problem today. We want to talk about the solution, because that's where it's at. So for us, that mindset shift is shifting from extractive and consumptive to making regeneration a byproduct of the way the economy actually functions. That's where we've got to get to.
Thank you. And it will happen through this network. So thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. And Joe, I think I'm handing back to you. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you to Lucy, Ellen, Kate, and Janine. I don't know about you, but that did feel like quite a special moment in the history of this event and of the circular economy discourse. So you've heard it. We need a fundamental shift in mindsets from do less bad to do more good. Most of us have pretty much come to expect that when we make or we buy something, people or nature pay the price. But what if every time we bought something, nature benefited? That in itself is a big idea, but as well as shifting the mindset, actually implementing the circular economy principles is practical, it is technical. So how do we balance this big picture, mindset shifting stuff with the imperative to act now? And this is no small feat, especially for those of you in the room, many of you in the room, who will be balancing short-term pressures with the need to invest in the future. Nestlé has committed to sourcing 50% of key ingredients from regenerative agricultural methods by 2030. And up next, we'll hear from Mark Schneider, the CEO of Nestlé, who will be in conversation with Wolfgang Blau. But first, let's see some regenerative agriculture in action.
Any change that's for the better is valuable. Every meal is a potential solution towards a better food system.
I'm really fluffing this badly.
You need to get into your stride.
I do need to get into my stride.
A homodod is, depending where you are in Suffolk or Norfolk, it can mean a hedgehog, it can sometimes mean a snail. They're sort of round and curled up. So perhaps slightly fancifully, a bean or a pea is round and curls up in its pod. So there was a tenuous connection with the beans and peas that were our first products.
Before Nick, William and I founded Hobmodod, I was always very interested in ecology and the world around us, and the realisation that food really was this fulcrum, this central point. It's in all of our lives, it's what all of us do, and that by making choices about what we eat and how it's grown, we can really affect the world around us, both socially but also environmentally. This sense that there is this, what you could broadly call a global emergency, and you could put the climate into that, you could put biodiversity loss into that, you could put inequality of food distribution into that, you could put chronic ill health into that. And really that's what we're driven by. You know, how do we find answers to these complex problems? How do we find a systems approach that will allow us to make a positive shift through diet and land use? And beans and peas are just at the heart of that. What we're going to have a look at today is to see whether the beans are doing that incredible thing of fixing nitrogen. So they work with a soil-borne bacteria called rhizobia. It's really difficult to get into it. The land we're on now is a clay soil, but for 60 or 70 years, they will have been farmed in quite a kind of oppressive way. Plant produces a nodule that surrounds that cluster of bacteria, and then the rhizobia take atmospheric nitrogen out of the air, turn it into nitrates that the plant can access. Can you see the red there? That is leg hemoglobin. So it's essentially the same as the hemoglobin that transports oxygen around our body to allow it to make use of the nitrogen. It's a really incredible, complicated process. So as well as feeding itself, this bean can potentially be feeding other crops in the field. So if we were to drill wheat into this bean crop, the wheat would grow better and need less nitrogen because the bean would be feeding it. 5%, roughly speaking, of all man-made climate emissions come from the production of nitrogen. So if we can avoid it by using plants like these beans, then that's absolutely fantastic.
One thing we need to see a lot more of across the board is diversity. And that's both diversity of the crops that are grown, but also the approaches which need to be adapted to suit local conditions. What we do is we try to work directly with the farmers to agree a price that works for them to farm viably and in the right way.
Maple Farm is a 137-hectare organic farm situated near the Suffolk coast. He started working with Hobart several years ago, and it's a relationship that works very well. What they're attempting to do by encouraging local farms to grow pulses, grow more pulses, because we don't grow enough in the UK. We very much try and practice a closed-loop system here within the farm, so that the only product that goes off the farm is in its finished retail packaging. Everything's incorporated back into the land.
What agroforestry is attempting to do is to create that edge effect, which in ecology is the most productive area. And by creating rows of trees with crops in between, you're essentially creating a woodland edge repeatedly where there's high nutrient levels, high biodiversity, and high productivity.
In this section, the first section we planted, there's 7 different species of trees in here.
Benefits are legion, really. There's nutrient cycling, there's bringing nutrients up from lower down to the point where the roots of the annual crops can't reach, and then distributing that on the surface in the autumn as the leaves fall down. There's moisture retention, although it might seem as if the trees are drawing moisture out of the ground. Actually, they're helping to retain moisture in the soil.
When we set this up, I thought it'd be years before we see a difference, and it wasn't. The amazing thing was that it was the first year. Just leaving the grass strips, the beetles come along. By trying to balance the system, we can move these nutrients around the farm and let the minimum amount of nutrients off the farm. We need to take as much carbon out of the system as possible. This is a perfect bird for us. I was really quite shocked to find that in order to make our hen food, we were using soya beans that were imported from China. And I thought, how can it be that we're having to bring these beans halfway across the world in order to feed our hens? And we tried all sorts of approaches. And about 15 months ago, somebody suggested to me, why not try keeping mealworms, raising mealworms, with the view to using them as an alternative to soya, because they're a high-protein food source. And being insects, and chickens want to eat insects, they're just a kind of perfect match, really. The beauty of the system is we've got the flour mill next door. And when we're producing flour, that also produces bran. And the bran is the perfect medium and food for the mealworms. So we put bran in the trays, along with also some of the pea flour that comes from hoppadods. The frass powder, which is their waste product, that's kept, and that is a fantastic fertiliser. Most conventional farms, they'll use ammonium nitrate fertiliser or other synthetic fertilisers, which is basically converting fossil fuel in the form of gas into a nutrient and replacing the nutrients like that. So really all you're doing is farming fossil fuels. That's unsustainable in the long term.
All farmers are competing with each other to achieve the highest yields in order to achieve a return that reflects their cost of production and makes them a living. If we can detach yield from the work of the farmer, then we can radically change the system. In fact, there are lots of different ways to feed the world that aren't just about yield.
Not about reducing what we pay farmers for what they produce. It's removing the incentive to maximise yields at all costs.
By making a lot of noise and demonstrating that change is possible, we can inspire farmers and other businesses in order to make changes to the way that they're working as well. We are not the change, but we are simply a catalyst and an enabler for change, I hope.
Mark Schneider, CEO of Nestlé. The scale at which Mark and his team operates is just staggering. Some numbers for context. 186 countries, 276,000 staff, roughly $90 billion in revenue. And with your broad portfolio of brands and activities, we could have great discussions about water management, about food security, about new agriculture. But we want to start with plastics, because soon after you have been appointed, Mark, in early 2017, already in 2018, you joined the Global Commitment for a New Plastics Economy of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and UNEP, and you also announced that Nestlé by 2025 would make all of its packaging either reusable or recyclable. About 4 years of the journey are over. You have 2.5 years left. Do you think you will reach that goal?
Wolfgang, thank you. And I think it was a real starting shot when it comes to circular thinking and also ultimately the journey towards regenerative thinking in our company. We'd always been a strong proponent of recycling. We had supported lots of EPR schemes around the world, had a deep interest in that, but it really galvanized our efforts. And 4 years into it, let me point out a few things where I think we made great progress, and then of course there's work to do. We always knew it was going to be a backloaded effort because it was not that these solutions were on the table ready to go. So we knew we had to put some effort into developing the ones we want to scale up. I think we've done very good progress on what I call design for recycling, so where you have a packaging product that is ready for recycling. I think that around the world, what we had to learn when it comes to recyclability, which then also assumes that there's sufficient capacity there to recycle. This is where the scaling up of the systems is going more slowly than what the entire industry and I think also EMF anticipated. So this is a reality we all have to face. The design for recycling part, we did not want to be dependent on our suppliers in the packaging industry alone. We felt that the rate of progress in the packaging industry had been at times insufficient. So in our research and development group, we started an Institute for Packaging Sciences. We're the only food and beverage company, to our knowledge, that has their own packaging materials research, because we wanted to be sure that we can prove new concepts, work with startups, and really be sure that there is a good rate of progress. And that has worked out really, really well. One regret and one area that where I'd like to do more, clearly more emphasis needs to be put on reuse and refill systems. I think there's a great future for those, and they are really circular by design, as was mentioned so often this morning. That's a really important feature. And unfortunately, while there's lots of pilots underway, what I haven't seen yet is the true winner that's kind of ready for pushing that button and then global scale up. And hopefully, over the next few years, we'll get closer to that.
One of your more recent initiatives is around creating a truly regenerative company.
Yeah.
What is a regenerative Nestlé compared to a Nestlé that eliminates waste?
Yeah. So look, building on all the comments that were made this morning, at a very high philosophical level, in a world around us where the biology and geology where we live is circular, essentially, when you have a linear process, even if you try to reduce then the footprint of that process, you create disbalances, and especially when you scale it up and make it ever bigger. And hence, turning many of these linear processes into circular processes, I think, is part of the solution. And we just saw a perfect example here from agriculture. So you heard about the commitment, so 50% sourcing by 2030 from regenerative sources. There's an intermediate goal of 20% sourcing by 2025. We're well on our way towards that. I think supporting these regenerative systems is a key aspect in everything we do. If you ask me about a definition of regeneration, I like a very high-level one that basically puts the respect for life and life at the center of everything you do. And you saw it here with how you treat the soil. So rather than putting some product made from fossil fuel into it, you're trying to feed it with living organisms and really sort of rejuvenate and strengthen some of the natural cycles that have been around for ages and are time-tested, as was mentioned this morning.
What is the bigger obstacle in that journey? Is it maybe the insistence of staff, or also just legacy cultures in an organization? Is it regulatory obstacles? Is it consumer behavior? Or all three of them?
Look, before we start looking inside the organization, let's look at the economics everyone is facing. So let's look at these farmers here. I think what they're up to is absolutely worthwhile. But after visiting a lot of farms and hearing people's journey towards that regenerative approach, the story is always the same. The first 2 or 3 years, it's very hard work for less output. And so that sounds nice, but what it means essentially, if you put it in your personal lives, okay, you work harder, you earn less. Okay, that's not a very tantalizing proposition. And it clearly shows that people who are interested in that, they need technological help and assistance, and they also need financial assistance to make it happen. If those are the obstacles in the world's most advanced economies, imagine in developing markets how much harder it is to change from some of these traditional farming practices to regenerative practices. And that's why I think we have the work cut out for all of us. After 2 or 3 years, in some cases, depending on the crop, 4 or 5 or 6 years, usually things turn. And then you have not only good restoration on the output, but also you do it in a much more sustainable way compared to the way before. And so overcoming that hump, I think that is where we've developed this concept of the just transition, where we try where we can to give that financial and technological assistance, and that is collectively what we have to do. The first unit of the new, almost without exception, tends to be more expensive than the last unit of the old. And hence, graduating to that and then with scale over time, bringing that down to make it more affordable, that's the challenge.
So to rephrase my question then, when we look at this 2025 target, which one of those factors worries you the most right now?
I think we're still on, especially the reuse refill, in that stage of trying to find the ideal solution that can be scaled up. I think once we have it, when it comes to our ability to implement and scale up, I have no concerns over that. Companies in general, and Nestlé is no exception, tend to be implementation machines, but here's truly one where we're still trying to find the solution, and where obviously even once we think we have it, we need to be sure there's support from the retailers around us, there's support from a regulatory point of view, and that the infrastructure also supports that. So clearly you're not alone in making those decisions. It has to be part of a wider context where everyone has to be supportive.
Going back to some of the things that Kate Raworth, Janine Benyus, and Alan MacArthur said earlier about this being very much about operations, procedures, technologies, but also about our current day definition of what businesses are here for, what do they exist for. Did you have moments where you thought, I thought this was about operations and materials and strategies and products, but increasingly this is about what we are here for and what is a business?
In all modesty and with a certain element of pride, I never had that feeling at this company, at Nestlé. And I think long before the whole purpose discussion became very fashionable, I think this is a company that had embraced the multi-stakeholder approach. It was never beholden to that 1980s mantra, we're here to make money, period. It was a company that saw itself as part of a fragile agricultural environment, trying to serve society through nutritious products. And so I think that very basic discussion, fortunately, was never there. And so I think when it comes to the purpose inside the firm, we're very committed to that and making the best of that.
Just last week, you published a remarkable text together with your direct competitor, Unilever CEO Alan Jope, in the Financial Times. I was surprised by the tone, the impatience that came through. There was this one sentence, paraphrasing from memory, yes, we can discuss the merits of sustainable management as long as we want. The time for action is now. What are you most impatient about?
Look, whether it's deforestation or circularity or climate protection, I'm getting more and more impatient when I'm hearing lots of negotiating about what it should be like in 2040, 50, or 60. And then, think about COP26 and some of the unseemly discussions that were going on at the very end of that. It is about kinking the curve, especially on greenhouse gases, in the 2020s. And so clearly, who is disclosing what they're doing, whether it's deforestation or greenhouse gas emissions? Are you still on your way up, or are you on your way down? In other words, is peak carbon behind you, or is it still in front of you? If it's still ahead of you, what are you doing to actually meet peak carbon and then go down? Those are the discussions we need to have. I think this is a generation and society around us has no longer that patience for dealing with something that's long after us. It's about now. What are we doing now with the elements we have at our disposals? And I hope that impatience translated into the article. I know Alan and Unilever feel the same way. And as you saw from the deforestation example, I think both companies have done a lot on this. And we feel that it's not acceptable that so many of our peers in our industry are not even disclosing what the deforestation footprint is like.
Mark, last question, and I'm asking you for a one-sentence answer. You're now CEO of Nestlé for a little more than 5 years. If there's specifically to the plastics economy one piece of advice you could give in hindsight to the Mark from 2017, what would it be?
Yeah, so look, it's pretty hard to do in one sentence, so
Try.
maybe I'll negotiate for a bit more. But I think the one, as I mentioned, reuse, refill, trying that earlier, and then also casting the net wider, like piloting more so that you have a menu of choices to pick from.
Thank you very much, Mark Schneider. Handing back to Ella and Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wolfgang and Mark. I love talking about impatience to scale solutions. Lots of good stuff is happening, and money is moving towards eliminating waste and pollution and circulating products and materials. But ultimately, what we're talking about today is regenerating. We want to move from linear and extractive towards circular and regenerative. And that's a new way of thinking about individual leadership, about business and society, and about our own place within nature.
So after lunch, we'll take this a level down and we'll hear examples of the industrial transformation by design. As ever at the summit, we've built in large breaks for networking and to start or continue your conversations. And this year, you'll find lighting landmarks around the room. They'll light up during the next break. And you'll also find the participants list in your app to discover and meet new friends. So if anyone's interested, I'll be lingering around by the octopus. Enjoy your lunch.